Hello and welcome to Media7. In this week's program we focus on coverage of the disaster in our backyard, the earthquake and tsunami in Samoa. Later in the program we'll mark New Zealand Book Month with a talk about the future of the book in New Zealand. But first, Jose Barbosa looks at the way the tsunami story unfolded.
Good morning. New Zealand Civil Defence in Wellington has issued an advisory saying there is the potential for a tsunami to hit New Zealand.
It started with a warning. As New Zealanders woke up and turned on their TV sets, a tsunami was on its way, having already hit Samoa.
Still trying to come to terms with what's happened, and people are still looking for their loved ones.
Initially, information was hard to come by.
We've spoken to people in Samoa and it's much more than rumour. They're running for their lives and they've seen people washed away.
Yes, that's the sort of reports that we're having too, of course, often,
Sure.
of course, the safe people.
I would give those a bit more credibility than rumour though, Colin.
But while we waited for the wave that never came,
A bit disappointed. I was keen to see a mean tsunami.
details about the destruction in Samoa started to emerge.
Even like some holiday makers that we were with, they've lost families, lost wives and children.
As the week wore on, the extent of the damage was clear.
They did speak with one lady, Carol Batchelor, whose entire resort had been devastated in Whaleapanga, but she wants to stay and rebuild, although 80% of her staff, she told me, are either dead or missing. And she says that hardly any of those bodies have been found, so she expects that death toll to rise considerably.
We've seen stories of loss and tragedy.
Lost his parents and two of our kids. Well, we only had 2 kids. We lost both our kids.
Lost two. Two of our beautiful daughters in the tsunami, Patria and Rebecca. Still unbelievable.
It was difficult to watch and sometimes difficult to report.
I spoke to a woman this morning who was looking for what remained of her personal possessions and some of that rubble you saw. Instead, she found a tiny baby. She said she pulled it out and she hugged it to her chest because she had children and she wanted the mother to know that someone cared about that child. There's not much you can say when people tell you a story like that. There was a sign on the side of the road on the way there that said, "Love and peace to all Samoa," and that pretty much summed it up.
In the end, farewells were said and aid was flown in.
New settlements have sprung up in the hills and many are overcrowded. 17 people living in this makeshift home.
The locations of the people are changing every day. It's different to what there was here yesterday. So, yeah, there's challenges to come.
And as always, life had to continue.
Whatever the future brings, we will just have to survive today.
I'm joined now by 3 reporters who covered what was at times a challenging story. One news reporter, Lisa Owen. Adrian Stevenon, who was in Samoa both as a reporter for Tangata Pacifica and as the cameraman for One News Paul Hobbs. And Radio New Zealand's Leilani Mamoisia. Welcome to you all. Lisa, when did you know you were going?
Well, I woke up that morning and, as is my routine, turned on the television, was listening to the radio, heard what had happened, so headed straight into work. And basically, I'd arrived 5 or so minutes later. Our bureau chief said, "Can you go? Will you go?" So I went home and packed my bag, and we were on the first flight out, which was the 2:30 flight that day.
That was the flight with the relatives, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So in some sense the story started there, didn't it?
It was an interesting situation because oftentimes you're flying to a crisis somewhere that doesn't necessarily actively involve New Zealanders, but obviously it was a situation where there was 1 degree of separation. You had all these people who had relatives. They were desperate to get there as well, and that was the first flight. So we were sort of journalist and victim, if you like, shoulder to shoulder in the
Were they
airline
comfortable
seats.
with you being there?
I've never been accepted or treated so kindly by families who have lost loved ones. They were very gracious and very accepting of our presence, and once we got there it was mind-boggling their concern for us in their moment of enormous grief.
Because you've done what is sometimes called trauma journalism before, haven't you?
Yeah, I was based for Television New Zealand in London for a couple of years. So I was there when the London tube bombings happened. I went to the Madrid train bombing. I've been to Palestinian territory at times of crisis. So I've been to those sorts of situations before. But as I say, I would have been flying from London to Spain or something like that. I'm not in a plane full of people who are going there for personal reasons. I might be with other journalists, but not in a confined space with all these victims' families, yeah.
And yet, even though you've done that kind of journalism before, that clip we showed just before, it's difficult sometimes, isn't it? You held it together in that piece to camera, but it looked hard.
Yeah, I think in this situation there was a lot of children involved, and there was a real rawness. You were arriving right at the time where people were still finding bodies. And I don't think they'd had much of an opportunity to even talk amongst themselves about it. And sometimes when you go into a situation like that, some people won't want to talk to you at all, and other people, you open the floodgate and they will tell you every single detail, right to the smallest thing, and they will just keep going until they're finished. And so for a lot of times we were that person that they spoke to. You were standing on the side of the road while people were prodding in the sand and in the ground looking for bodies, and one of the relatives would be standing there and you would just be the person there, so they would talk to you.
Adrian, you were in the unusual and possibly difficult position of going to somewhere where you knew you had family. Your home village was one of the worst hit. Did that play on your mind as you went, or was it just a purely professional thing of just getting packed and getting there?
Oh, the first thing you try and do in the morning when you hear that a tsunami has hit Samoa is you try and ring your family back in Samoa. When you can't get to them, it's kind of like, well, I've got to work, I've got to get to the airport, but I'm still trying to get, the last calls I made on the plane were to Samoa to see if my family was okay. When I got there in Whaliolo, ring my family, I get hold of one of them. They're like, we're okay, we don't know about the others. And it's kind of, even as the week kind of progresses, it's playing on your mind, and it wasn't really till the end that you find out we're all okay. But we all know another family or another few families that have lost loved ones. So. And
meanwhile, you still have to do your job.
Yeah, and you're saying, like, we're on the plane with those. Well, those people that had lost loved ones. Well, I knew a lot of the people on the plane, and I talked to my friend Ben, and I saw him there, and I said, Ben, are your family all right? And Ben's like, I think I've lost 8. What do you say to him? I just said to him, Ben, I really don't know what to say to you right now. He ended up losing 13. So it's tough stuff.
You went there both as as a straight-up news cameraman and as the reporter for Tangata Pacifica. Mm-hmm. How did the two jobs differ apart from the obvious? Did you think the Tangata Pacifica audience needed something different from you? Yeah,
working for news and knowing that it's daily news. People want to know what's happening right here, right now. And for our audience, they've already seen all that. So in my mind, it's kind of, well, I can't show just more death and destruction. It's got to be something more than that. So in my mind, it was kind of, it needed to be a story about the phoenix from the ashes. And that's what people were trying to tell me anyway. So it's not like I was trying to, go out and find it. It was right there. And that was a story that I think needed to be told last week when we went to air. So.
Leilani, when did you know you were going?
It was a similar story to Lisa. I got into work and my boss just said, do you want to go? I said, yep. Had to make a few calls to Samoa first to see if we can get in touch with anyone in the affected areas, and then I just went home, packed my bags and hopped on the plane, same plane, with all the relatives, yeah.
So how long were you there before you were able to file?
Well, I got there and, on the plane with all the victims' relatives, you're already working on the plane. You're talking to people. You're being told you're speaking with them. You're trying to find out what's happened, because not much information has come out at that point. I filed for that night, and then straight first thing in the morning you're filing again.
So this is what makes your job a bit different, isn't it? And that you had to file throughout the day, I would assume.
Yeah, well, you have to, and I was the only person there, so I'm having to file for the evening, and then you have to think about what can I say for the morning that's new, but you don't. You want to get as much information out there, so you don't want to hold too much back, and then you have to think about what you're going to say next, and keep going, nighttime, morning again. So, yeah. But the thing is, there was always something to say. There was always a story to be told.
So, what are the practicalities of that? Did you have? I mean, you did it on a cell phone.
It was all on cell phone. I went and tried to file. The hotel said, wireless internet. Bought my internet card, internet's down. So everything was done on the phone. But I think, it was better that way almost, because you were just doing it there. You got the information and you just phoned it in. And I think people just wanted to hear what was happening then.
Well, with only one of you, how do you make the decision on where to go?
Well, my main thing was I wanted to get out there. That's what I spent a little bit of time. My first day in Apia, I went to a funeral, the Tui Annandale's funeral. I think that was possibly the first funeral that had been held. Her wishes were to be buried within 24 hours of her death, so that's what they did. And then I tried to get some information from the government, but then I was out there, and I went out there every day, and I tried to stay out there for as long as I possibly could, because that's where the story is, and that's where the people are, and you just want to talk to the people, because the government, they're not talking to you anyway, but it's the people's story that you want to tell.
Lisa, you also had to go and get the story that was going to be of interest to New Zealanders, which was the Martin family who lost 2 daughters. How do you make the approach to do that story? Because you've got the grieving family. Was that difficult?
Yes, I have to say though, as I said before, I do think it's a story of, people talk about 6 degrees of separation. This was 1 degree. It wasn't just the tourists, because a lot of these people that you're dealing with, most of their family members, like Adrian, a number of them, they live in New Zealand, so they're part of our community as well. The Martins, there was a local police officer, a New Zealand police officer who lives in Apia, and he was looking after the Martin family. So we had a phone number for them anyway, a cell phone number. We made a direct approach to them. They asked for privacy, you respect that, and then we liaised with the police officer after that. And really, I think a whole system kicked in where they were very good about keeping the media informed. We weren't wanting to chase people down in their time of the darkest of grief. Then they came back to us and they did a media conference and dealt with everybody at the same time in one situation.
Did they get advice on that, or did they just handle it well?
I think because they actually stayed, I'm aware that they actually stayed with the local police officer who was a friend of a friend. So I'm sure they got advice. The New Zealand High Commission had staff working closely with families, and they worked around the clock, looking for people who were just phoning and saying, I think my cousin's on holiday over there, do you think you know where they are? So they were dealing with families, and the press conference was held at the High Commission, so very clearly there was a close working relationship there. Yeah.
Adrian, did it help that you were Samoan going over there?
Yeah, totally. I mean, of course it does. I mean, you know the lie of the land, you know some of the people, unfortunately you know some of the people who have lost their loved ones. But you also, being Samoan, you understand how Samoans think, how Samoans act, and sometimes being Samoan as a journalist is the hardest thing, because you know that they've lost their loved ones, and it's not your role to come straight in there and come in with your camera and put the mic in. And so sometimes that's really hard, and sometimes it's easier for your Palangi journalists to come in there, because they'll forgive you for that. They'll forgive you for that, because they're like, well, they don't know the rules. But when they see you, sometimes it's like, well, you know the rules, so why are you here?
Leilani, I saw you smiling and nodding at that. Did you find the same thing?
Yeah, I agree. I think because you know the customs, and you know the certain level of respect that's needed, so you might hold off, to show them that respect, when other people, as Adrian says, they're more forgiving to the Palangi journalists, even in dress code, So you do have to keep that in mind. But I think they notice that, and when they notice that you're showing respect, then they will come and give you the time of day, and they will do it really gracefully.
Adrian, on one occasion, said to me, that guy over there's got a great story to tell. I know him. I'm not in the respectful time to go and speak to him. Why don't you just go over and...
That's fascinating. We'll take a break now, and after the break, our reporter in Samoa talks to the reporters on the ground.